So if you've been around St. Peter's for the past month or so, you know that we have been doing something called the St. Peter's body scan. And this morning, we wanted to share our results of what we heard. We called it the body scan because we wanted to, in the same, not like MRI body scan, but like meditation body scan, when you kind of just pay attention to different parts of the body and try to listen, try to be attentive, ask yourself, like, what is the body saying, my body saying to me right now? And we're doing this as, like, strategic planning is not my personal strength. We have not yet done a real strategic planning process. And so we felt that this year was the year to do that, and we wanted to start by listening. So we're in our heading into the fifth year of our church revitalization. So think about it like we've been in pre-K, and now we're going into kindergarten. And so at this key moment, we're asking, like, who are we becoming? What is the Spirit stirring among us? How is God calling us, like in Ephesians 4, as Kimberly read, calling us to grow up into maturity in the season ahead? And how will that shape our priorities as a church? So this happened through one-on-one conversations, online, and out of roughly 100 adults, we received 52 responses, which from what I understand is a good return rate. Not everyone chose to respond, and we definitely missed out on some folks for a variety of reasons. But this is also not the end. It's not like, one and done, but it's an ongoing conversation and process of discernment. So if we didn't get to you and you would like to still share something with us, please come and talk with me afterwards. And we decided, not to make it anonymous, like an anonymous survey, because as the mission statement that we've been talking about over the past few months states, that we follow Jesus into loving, liberating, life-giving relationship with God, our others, and our world. And you really can't have relationship without being known, knowing and being known. So this body scan was also meant to say, like, who do we have out here? Like, who's with us? How are they feeling about what's going on? And can we grow in that culture of speaking the truth in love and really building trust, amongst each other? So we want to thank everyone who took time to share their thoughts with us. And the themes that we were highlighting, it wasn't like everything, but it's like what came up repeatedly from multiple people. And spoiler alert, there weren't any bombshells, but it was so helpful to just hear from actual people, what they were thinking, and just to kind of name that as so. And I especially want to thank Ryan and Caitlin, who are standing behind me, for their partnership in this yeah, we can clap for them, sure. Partnership in this process. And I'm going to hand it over to Caitlin to talk about our strengths. I will talk about where we're needing to grow, and then Ryan's going to close us out with next steps. And one last thing, as we're sharing, I'm going to invite us to listen sort of like Lectio Divina style. If you're not familiar with Lectio Divina, it's like when normally it's with scripture, but you're listening for a word or a phrase or something that was said that really kind of resonates with you and sort of jumps out at you. So just to be like prayerfully listening, even as we're talking, because that may be an invitation from God to you. All right, so I hand it over to Caitlin.
Thanks, Christine. This is on? Okay.
Yep. Yep.
Hearing my voice. Good morning, everyone. We can go to the first slide, or the next slide. So I'm really excited to have the opportunity to speak with you today about what came through as the strengths of St. Peter's. This is a word cloud. If you're not familiar with it, it basically, the larger the word is, the more frequently that was used in the responses. And so you can look and you see the first word that, really, even in the back, everyone can see is community. And we heard this a lot, that it's the people of St. Peter's, and the community is one of the greatest strengths. One person said, I think this is the first time I felt a part of a church community. At St. Peter's, we are invited to be in community. It is a safe space where I can be myself and be fully known. Another person said, there's something happening here. It feels dynamic, evolving, like the living, breathing church. Another word that came through a lot is accepting or acceptance. One person said, St. Peter's feels like a safe church in that you are allowed to be in whatever part of your spiritual journey that you just are. No pressure to be somewhere that you're not, or arrived somewhere you haven't yet. Someone else said, I love the diversity. St. Peter's is inclusive, affirming. I did not have that in my previous church. Leadership was mentioned quite a bit, and I'll come back to that to unpack it in a moment. Diversity was also came through, and they said, one person said, think of a room on a typical Sunday, all ages, newborns up to retirees. People are coming from all over the city and New Jersey, careers, faith backgrounds, all sorts of spiritual backgrounds. In that diversity, there isn't any kind of pressure to become one thing. People are allowed to be themselves. And then finally, I want to emphasize, or the last word I'll talk about today, and I think we're going to share this in an upcoming newsletter so you can see all the tinier words as well and reflect on them. But in terms of welcoming, St. Peter's is welcoming of people joining for the first time. You come and you feel welcome. St. Peter's has always been welcoming, even before Father Stephen. It was a welcoming community, and they just meant it. You believe it and want to come back. So if we can go to the next slide. Again, another word cloud. This one specifically talking about our leadership at St. Peter's. So first and overwhelmingly, you can see the thing that we appreciate about our leadership is that we have diversity. One person said, so many people cited this as a strength of our leadership. One person said, the fact that we have two women of color that are leaders. For our kids to see that, it's really important. Another one said, everyone brings their own strengths. Christine, Leisha, Aaron, Ian, such diverse leadership styles. Another person said, I do like that Leisha and Christine are pushing the envelope and doing a lot of meeting people where they are. Both of you are so grounded, transparent, and welcoming. It is refreshing. Other people also talked about the fact that it is our leadership is spirit-led. So one person said, it was clear to us when we met Christine that her plan was to listen to what the Spirit told her. It has helped create a safe place where we can have that diversity that we have. Additionally, and this was fun to read, and I think is definitely true of St. Peter's, is just our sense of humor, the sense of humor that our leadership has, the humility, and that we don't take ourselves too seriously. One person said, I love that we don't take ourselves too seriously. We take God and worship seriously, but within that, there is the ability to have humor. When communion goes wrong, the doxology messes up, I love those moments that it can just be a mess. And then finally, the last finding I'll highlight for you today is just that the teachings connect to the world. So one member said, I love how St. Peter's holds God's word and spirit in tandem with the world in which we live. The sermons feel both spiritually filling and in touch with the world I walk out into after services. And finally, someone related to the teachings connected to the world said, Leisha and Christine are impactful speakers and very tuned into social issues, able to integrate social issues and make connections between the readings and current social issues. And actually, I forgot one. The final one is vulnerable. And in that, various people mentioned different sermons that they've heard, whether Michael talking about anxiety, or both Leisha and Christine talking about their journeys with fertility. And so that felt really important too, is just the authenticity and vulnerability that that our leadership shows. So again, this is just a glimpse. We'll send these out afterwards. Happy to talk about them more. And over to Ryan.
Over to me.
Over to Christine
Yes.
again.
Yes, and I can use
That's
this. Yeah. And I swear we did not pay Caitlin to share these stories, but it was good to receive. Good to receive, and thank you for that encouragement. I'm going to share about places that people name that we need to grow. And I definitely, in the way that I'm wired, tend to focus a lot more on like what I see as gaps or where we need to stretch. And so you can go to the next slide. Kevin. So the first area that was named, and this was probably like they're kind of in order of like how many people responded. This was like the overwhelming category of wanting to grow in building community and connection. So a number of people said that they felt like meeting new people was hard. So it was interesting, like community was one of the biggest things in terms of our strengths, but what was also expressed was that it's been also feeling hard to get to know people. So multiple people said coffee hour is awkward for them, and a lot of people just want to bolt out of service afterwards. But what was interesting is coupled with that, a number of people commented that they felt like, they also felt like some of it was on them. So like, I'm not sure if it's like St. Peter's growth or my own growth as part of St. Peter's to kind of stretch and to show up and be willing to show up a little bit more. There's one person, there's a new men's breakfast fellowship that's starting and that he had wanted to get involved with, and he was heading out of town on Thursday, which is when they were going to meet. But he saw Andrew Haas on that Sunday, who asked if he was going to come or not. And then he said that he decided to leave later on Thursday so that he could attend. And he had said something like, if I say that I need something like this, then I also need to show up and support it. But someone else said that having something like the newcomers lunch was really helpful because it provided a structure, it provided a place to go to. There was prompts to get people talking to each other, and that that support is really needed. There was a desire for both groups that bridge and bond. So bridging, meaning, whether it's more of a co-ed group instead of the gendered groups that we had this past year, different seasons, people in different seasons of life. A couple people made reference to the Howard Thurman book that we read a couple years ago, where there were different racial groups that were in conversation with each other. But then also bonding. So whether it's something like LGBTQ plus specific groups that kind of delve into just gender and sexual identity more specifically, or newly married couples or parents who are in a similar season of life and feeling like, depending on where you are, both bridging spaces and bonding spaces are important. And then opportunities to gather outside of Sundays. One person said, how can we continue the conversation beyond Sundays? Sometimes there's like scheduling challenges. So, opportunities to meet off hours, like early morning Zoom or 9 o'clock prayer, to be able to hang out together after service or before service. Somebody mentioned retreats as being really important, or geographically based small groups, so it's easier to connect with people who live near you. The second area, that you can go to the next slide, and I was actually kind of surprised by this. A lot of people mentioned our buildings. So I always tend to think people don't really care about buildings, or that's not the most important thing, but a lot of you mentioned that stewarding our physical space was important to you. And someone mentioned, I think it's Reggio method or something, but where there's a line that says, environment is the third teacher, which I thought was interesting. Like the environment actually matters, and it speaks something to us when we walk into this space. So there was a lot of love and vision for our beautiful, historic, falling apart space, and really what it could be, and excitement about as we think about the next 5 or 10 years. We acknowledge the kind of complexity and crampedness of some of our space, but also exciting to think about like how this could be used as a gathering place for our neighborhood and our city. And then, two, funding to support our infrastructure. That growth is needed in this area. It's not for lack of desire, but lack of funding. So if there are any multimillionaires out there, make yourselves known. But that is something we're going to need to address in a serious way in the near future. All right, the third thing was, the next slide, is serving the church. The next slide. There you go. Serving the church and serving the city. So a number of people mentioned more people volunteering. And one person was like, you guys are too easy on people. You need to be more tough, about when you're calling for volunteers. Just of more people needing, wanting people to be engaged in serving, identifying and growing in our spiritual gifts, and knowing that every single person has spiritual gifts deposited in them, and wanting to, help discern around that and nurture that more fully. There was concern, along with that kind of concern, which we appreciate, expressed about clergy burnout and whether Alicia and I are getting burned out. And just a sense that we may be doing too much, and that everyone tends to come to us for everything. So how do we strengthen more parts of the body? So it's not like we just have like one really huge bicep, but like that every part is strengthened and muscular. And then reaching out to our neighbors. One person mentioned, what would it look like to think about like 3 blocks to the north, south, east, and west, and see that as like kind of more specifically reaching out to people right physically around us. But then also, in terms of how we serve, a couple of people mentioned the food pantry. How can we get more people involved in connecting with the food pantry in some way? All right, then my last slide is just additional comments that kind of stuck out. So these were a little bit more like one-off things, that there was expressed like a gratitude for the spaciousness that we have here. Like wherever you're at in your spiritual journey, you can come and just be and just sit and heal if that's what you need to. But one person also challenging us to say like, okay, it's great that like you guys, we're so accepting, but sometimes we need to also just be challenged more, and challenged to commitment, challenged to expectations in terms of being a part of St. Peter's. There was also, just geography being a particular challenge to participation, especially outside of Sundays. So, going back to that idea of like maybe geographically based small groups or gatherings of different kinds. And then finally, like I really appreciated this one of like changing our narrative from survival to thriving. And how, when we first came to St. Peter's, it was like barely surviving, and then the pandemic hit. And so much of like me and Leisha's time here at St. Peter's was really shaped by the pandemic. So it's always this feeling of like, we're barely hanging on, we don't know if we're gonna make it through this. And even for us as leaders, being able to say like, okay, like we're not in survival mode, like we've survived, like we have survived, and we can breathe, and we can really look to like St. Peter's has hope and a future. So really changing that storyline, which was like super helpful to me. So those are the places that were the main things that came out in terms of areas of needing to grow. And then I'm going to hand it over to Ryan about next steps.
Perfect. I didn't need to say next slide. Thank you for reading my mind. All right. So I just want to share, at our vestry meetings this year, we've been working on being more prayerfully attentive to God's voice in each of our lives. So that was something we were called to early on, to just build that in ourselves. As we knew we were looking ahead to more corporate discernment, we needed to build that muscle of discernment and practice in our own life. By strengthening this in ourselves, then we're going to be stronger in our body of leaders, the vestry, to be more prepared to corporately make decisions that move our church forward in our mission to be a part of the loving, liberating, and life-giving Jesus movement, along with the greater Episcopal Church. So I have a quote here posted on this slide about discernment, so I'm just going to read it out loud to you. Discernment, in a most general sense, is the capacity to recognize and respond to the presence and the activity of God, both in the ordinary moments and in the larger decisions of our lives. We're moving on now that we've kind of been able to listen slowly, carefully, prayerfully with each of you, or with the 50%, which is awesome that we were able to. And like Christine said, I'm going to echo, you can come up and talk to me too if you feel like you want your voice to be heard at this point. And now it's going to be time to make some decisions. So weighing that variety of data, including your words, right, that data from the St. Peter's body scan, our next step is that we're then going to identify several possible focus areas and then seek to discern where God is inviting us to invest our resources. And when I say resources, I'm thinking about, yes, money, right? I'm also thinking about our gifts, our spiritual gifts, right? I'm thinking about the people, that volunteering, our thoughts, our prayers. So thinking about where we're going to invest those resources. Once we are led to our primary focus area, that's the time to create that strategic plan to heal places where we are hurting and or nurture opportunities that are budding here at St. Peter's. And so, next slide. This last step leads us to the creation of a theory of action. So this simple and clear if then, and I know there's a so that, and I'll kind of explain that, statement identifies our intended outcomes and the best understanding about how to get there. So we're thinking if we do or if we desire blank, then we will need to blank so that we can blank, right? And that's kind of what we're going to need to discern together. And then with that clear statement, and more specific than what I just said right now, because we haven't gotten to that point yet, we develop a plan to more explicitly detail the actions, individuals, and resources that I talked about earlier that are needed to make this happen. So as we progress through this process, we are going to continue seeking input, communicating the decisions that we're coming to, and updating you with new developments, and sharing opportunities to join us in the work. So that's part of that transparency in the process. I want to personally thank you again. This was exciting, the St. Peter's body scan, and this was something that I feel really personally attached to, and I was very glad to be able to hear from the people that I got to speak to. I'm really grateful that you shared your thoughts and hopes for St. Peter's Chelsea as we have engaged in this time. We're grateful to all of you for your continued active participation and your trust in us. If you haven't connected with someone and you want to make sure that your voice is heard, like you saw that word cloud and you're like, but they missed this, make sure you let us know. And thank you again.
Thank you. Yeah, so we realize this isn't like a traditional sermon, but we just felt like we would have the most people here on a Sunday morning, and our sharing this with you would maximize our chances of most of you reading it versus if we or hearing this versus us emailing it out to you. But now, so, again, this is just the beginning of this conversation. So what I want us to do now is just to take a moment, and I had invited you to kind of listen prayerfully. But if there was anything that kind of stuck out to you or resonated with you, just to be able to kind of sit with that for a moment and to ask God, like, God, what is your invitation to me, in that word or in that phrase? Maybe nothing came to you and you're just like, didn't really feel like you connected with anything. Just to take a moment then to connect with what is my desire? What is the longing that I have for a church community in the season ahead? So just for us to spend like a minute doing that, and then we'll move into our time of prayers of the people. We must no longer be children, tossed to and fro and blown about by every wind of doctrine, craftiness, and scheming. But speaking the truth in love, we must grow up in every way into Him who is the head, into Christ, from whom the whole body, joined and knit together by every ligament with which it is equipped, as each part is working properly, promotes the body's growth in building itself up in love.